So I want to talk about a couple of internationalization theories and what we're actually talking about when we are thinking of internationalization. And it's really just this process of moving from one particular geographic location to the other one. So I'm a strong believer that we don't necessarily have a particular theory for internationalization. It's more of a geographic process. So we would call this geographic strategies, I would suggest, but perhaps I'm wrong, right? So the idea is to move from one particular location to another one and ever expand in that location. So I think that the international borders are somewhat different. But the really what you're expanding and going from is different institutional frameworks and how that actually works. So what we are trying to explain, and I'm not a believer that there's these really stark big differences between what we're trying to explain in any sort of scientific theory. We're just using different sort of perspectives and lenses and how that might look like. But it's all about human nature, and it's all about how we organize as a system so that we can collaborate in a much better way. And so there's different focuses in what you're collaborating with. So when we're talking about internationalization, it's thinking about, okay, how do you collaborate across geographic spans? But then as well, like thinking about like, okay, how do we reach out to those different groups? What does it actually look like? So the key one that sort of began, there's a number of different ones, right? So the economists would began talking about foreign direct investment many years ago. And we're looking at like, at the macro level that there is this foreign direct investment. So what is that? That's when a company or maybe it is, a larger institution invests in another country, and then they're measuring at an aggregate level this foreign direct investment, how many assets that are being owned in a particular country, what is revenue being generated within those particular countries, and looking at that generally at the sort of often at the country level is what you're looking at with foreign direct investment, but you might be looking at sort of manufacturing, for example, and how that actually matters. But years ago, people started to become interested in why companies themselves go and do geographic expansion. And one of the ones that I really like, and there's a bunch of them, I'm not going to talk about all of them. One of the ones that I often think about is with the internationalization process is the Uppsala model. It's from Uppsala University, Johan and Johnson, I believe, in 1978. Talked about this, and it was really thinking about, okay, we're in small countries. I think I'm going to get this wrong. Is it Sweden, I believe, where the Uppsala University is, and they're thinking about, okay, how do you move from country to country to country? If you think about 1978, that was actually a really big thing, but they were talking about these sort of smaller countries, and these sort of Scandinavian countries. They explain that. But the idea is you move in ever increasing uncertainty, basically, and going from one place to the next, right? And you go from things that you're more comfortable with. They talk about psychological distance, how comfortable you feel with those particular countries. And you move from ones that you're more comfortable with to ones that are more extreme, and sort of more in what are called entry modes, how you enter into different regions from sort of entry modes that are more comfortable for you, exporting to ones that are more extreme, uh, creating a wholly owned subsidiary in another country, right? Like really more progressive ways. Now, that theory has been used in various different ways. It's sort of one extension that has been popular since Oviatt and McDougall many years ago talked about this, 1993. I actually did my master's on this particular topic. But talking about born globals, so those companies that are born from the beginning and are thinking about being international from the beginning. So, that at the time they were like, this was a really curious thing. This is where the internet was just becoming a thing, right? 1993, the internet didn't become a really big thing until 1998, and that's when people really started getting excited about it. Was in the early 2000s, and what they're looking at and thinking about is why do these companies become increasingly more international? And what are the opportunities that exist when you're really international? What are the challenges and frictions that exist when you're international? Now, I don't think that that is surprising today. That you can often, extract value by being international and create value by being international early on. But it is a really new phenomenon. People are still very curious about it, and there's an active stream of research of looking at how this actually behaves and what is the difference between these kind of organizations and ones that actually don't choose to do that, right? So sort of maybe it's a willingness of becoming international. Maybe you are international as a person, right? So you're a foreign national in a different country. And you decide to sort of exploit that, right? So you're an expat in the United States, for example, and you're from India, so you have some friends back in India, and then you start working with those folks from India. What are what are some other things? You might talk about networking is another one, where you look at sort of the network that you might get access to and the flows of information, resources, different things along that particular network, right? So it might be looking at your existing network, and looking at where that network can be expanded across the world and what that might actually look like. There was some interesting research there. Um, but another sort of domain, and the way that we often think about this in sort of international business is sort of smattering of different things. Right. So another really important thing, um, I haven't really broadly read this literature in maybe 10 years, I guess, but generally, culture is an important thing. Looking at the sort of cultural, cross-cultural boundaries, I would suggest are really important, and how people deal with those cross-cultural boundaries, like the tensions that you feel when, you have different language barriers, for example, the challenges that you might face as you're going and looking at these different barriers to prevent internationalization. Now, another really interesting one, and it's mostly focused on larger firms, is using transaction cost economics, where you look at why. So the gist behind transaction cost economics, and you'll have to look for the citations for all this kind of stuff, right? Like I'm not going to go and talk about that here. But the idea with transaction cost economics was thinking about, we have transactions that we want to use, and take advantage of and trade, but sometimes it's much more difficult to perform these transactions because there's like a friction involved, right? So if you want to take advantage of, I don't know. Let's say that you're in New Zealand and you want to work with somebody in Argentina, for example. You might be frustrated with the transactions that are being carried out because you don't understand, what's actually going on the other side. You might be getting ripped off. There might be lots of bargaining that's happening. So what you end up doing is saying, to heck with this. I am actually going to create a subsidiary in Argentina, because then I can control the process a little bit more and reduce the transactions. So the theory is, at least as far as I know, be really honest here. The theory is that, if it becomes frustrating, right? If there's high transaction costs and you feel like there's lots of bargaining and things like that. The transaction cost is how much cost is affiliated with the transaction itself, the economic transaction. And if it's too high, then you're going to internalize that particular, that particular process and that particular subsidiary. So then you run and monitor it, and you can have better governance, whatever. You know what I'm talking about, right? So the idea is that you can sort of control this a little bit more and reduce the challenges of working international. There is a lot of recent research is sort of looking at institutions, as far as I know, and looking at how, they deal with transactions across different institutions, how different institutions across different countries actually matter. And it's really sort of an interesting area of research that is pretty hot, I guess. And then, the last one I would sort of talk about is maybe, and it's sort of related, is looking at the liability of foreignness, right? So you don't understand the institutions as much. They don't understand you in the different institutions as a company. And so you have to navigate these particular institutions where you have this liability of foreignness because you don't really know what's going on. They don't know what you're going on, so you're going to have to pay a higher cost. And so you're trying to reduce all of those the liability of foreignness as much as possible. So then you might do things where you signal that you're not necessarily foreign to the sort of local market, right? So all of this, that's why I think that, there's these kind of theories and stuff that sort of smatter around. But all of this is really talking about the nature of going into different geographic regions, right? So for me, I live in, I live in Tallahassee, I'll be honest there. So I live in Tallahassee, and if I was to, sell something to Miami, which is 8 hours away, still in the state of Florida, there is all the same challenges that you're going to face along the way. It's just probably going to be at a much smaller scale, but you're still going to face many of the same problems, at least from my perspective, right? So sort of human nature component of it is not a lot different. And so it's your job is figure out, okay, how can you go increasingly more international? Why do you want to actually go more international? Why do you want to take advantage of that? Is it to your advantage not to go international? Maybe sometimes it is, right? You have to sort of think about that process and what that actually means. So hopefully this helps you out. Give me a thumbs up if it does. Take care and have a wonderful day.